Brilliant. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Hope you're all having a nice week, and thanks for joining us today. This is the third webinar in a series of informative sessions we put together to help any audience learn more about digital transformation. The session today will last around about an hour, and we should have some time for questions at the end. If you don't have any questions throughout, please feel if you do have questions throughout, please feel free to add them to the question panel, and you should see that when you hover your cursor over the screen. If you want to leave a question at the end, feel free to unmute yourself as well. We try and make these sessions as collaborative as possible, and we're always happy to chat at any point. Hope you enjoy the presentation. So yeah, first of all, just to introduce a little bit about Zoodoo. First of all, we were founded around about 7 years ago. We are a digital agency. We focus on development, working with people on new digital concepts, and also digital marketing. We've got a team based here in the UK. We've also got a partner company in China as well. So we do some China-related projects. Today's really focused on the development side of things, and we will walk you through what we believe is how to develop a successful mobile app in 2021. So over the years, we've worked with a wide variety of different clients, all the way from clients who are kind of startup businesses all the way to multinational organizations in places like the US, Europe, or China. And ultimately, our end goal there is just to help people reinvent and optimize their digital assets and make as much return on investment as possible on these platforms that we build. So today's going to be presented by myself. I'm managing director of Zoodoo, James Buchan, and Craig Watt's going to walk you through more of the development side of things a little bit later on. Just to walk you through some of our recent app projects that we've worked on, it'll just give you an idea of the kind of stuff we build as a company. First of all, we've done a workforce engagement piece that had near field communication, building access. So NFC, it's the same thing that you use for kind of Apple Pay and Google Pay. And that was also a building engagement piece where it made that building, one building with multiple tenants in it, part of a community. So it had stuff like ride sharing and a shop in it and stuff like that as well. So that was a very innovative project, and also the NFC is quite an on-point technology at the moment, because it moves people away from having physical cards where they might need to touch surfaces as well. It just keeps it all on their mobile. We've also worked on a personal fitness piece. So that was where we digitized the personal fitness or a PT process there, taking that to a completely digitized format, which is another industry which is quite on point with the moment. It is an industry that has moved completely online with the lockdown, and there's been a lot of innovations over the past year. We also worked on a social media platform for influencers. So that was looking at how you can connect influencers with each other to create projects and grow followings. We've also worked on payment and invoicing apps in the fintech space, so on kind of Salesforce programs, also with the likes of fintech apps that create an escrow wallet to facilitate safe transactions. We've also done stuff like tour guiding. So we built an app for the Reavers Road, which is just down in the borders. That looks at GPS activated audio tours. So as you're driving around the countryside, it starts telling you what's going on around you. So that was really great for Scottish tourism. And that also had an element of a discount pass as well when you made a purchase of the audio guide that you can use for local businesses. We've also done a SaaS platform for a business called Community Club Apps, which they've just launched their first football club app, which allows football clubs to kind of create more of a community. So it's a white label app that gets branded up and personalized for that particular club. Brilliant. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a taste for what we do as a business. Today's webinar, we're going to cover a wide variety of different topics. Really, the core focus is really trying to teach you how to build a successful app in 2021, and also kind of watch out for some of the key evolutions that have come from mobile app development. So we're going to walk through, first of all, the evolution of apps. We're going to move on to native versus cross-platform versus web apps. So there's a few different variations of technologies you can choose there. We're also going to walk through things to consider when creating an app. Craig's going to touch on the development process, and then we'll give you some top tips towards the end on developing your app and things you might want to consider at the forefront of innovation. So first of all, just talking about the evolution of apps, it's really apps as we know them now. They did exist earlier to 2005, but probably more in a .exe format. So that was something you might download onto your device and use it. It was similar to the Windows apps that you had back in the day. So these days, just thinking about the mobile journey, that really kicked off in 2005. That was when you saw a lot of websites were becoming mobile optimized, and you saw the rise of the smartphone devices. So a lot of people were purchasing smartphone devices. We then had the evolution of native apps. So that was where you could build an app. So on an app that was in native Swift or for iOS or Java for Android, and they would be pushed to the individual app stores, and users could download them onto their smartphone devices. The next evolution there was onto mobile web apps. So this is where you could move away from those native technologies and really develop more complex functionality behind web apps themselves. And what we've seen actually is over the past 10 years, there's been a kind of more of a merger of mobile apps and web apps. And one of those key factors there was the progression of hybrid apps. Hybrid apps, effectively what that allows you to do is build once, and then you can push across two platforms. So it significantly reduces the cost of developing a mobile app. And that means you don't have to develop in those native frameworks and hire almost double the amount of resource to do that. We're actually more recently seeing the evolution of micro apps and apps within apps. So what I mean by that is that you might have heard of WeChat. WeChat is a kind of significant platform, particularly out in Asia, which you can create mini programs which effectively stand as an app within an app. So there's a limitation on the size of them and the complexity. So they always work in an online mode only. So you won't have any offline functionality there, but they are getting increasingly more complex as well. So you can do that even in programs like Facebook as well. You can also develop messenger apps, for example, for your business. So that's more of a recent evolution as technologies develop. In terms of user interfaces, we've really gone all the way from where we were doing click interactions. That was hovering your cursor over an app to kind of make click on buttons and make gestures. And then we moved towards, as smartphones developed, we had gesture interfaces. So, that's where you could swipe left, swipe right. And that's quite a common theme in apps these days. We've also, around about 2013, we had more context-aware tech. So that's really been possible as well with the evolution of connectivity. So most, with the rise of 3G, 4G, and now 5G, you can get really specific pinpoints of data from devices. So that's, for example, location. I mentioned the Reavers Road app. That works through GPS location services. So even if you don't have any signal at all, it will still trigger the audio for what's going on around you. So it has reached quite a significant level of involvement there. We've also had the rise of voice assistants. Voice with the likes of Siri, Alexa. You can now develop apps that work with those voice activation technologies as well. So a lot of apps these days are built with voice assistant in mind, and you can actually trigger certain functions as well through the voice assistant. We've also had the rise of artificial intelligence, which has really added a lot more power to what apps can do with data. So it's and the rise of 5G has allowed these types of apps that are processing a lot of data also perform a lot better. And also with that as well, we've had Internet of Things, which allows lots of interconnected devices to speak to each other to feed in data. So yeah, I guess when you're starting up, thinking of developing an app, you probably want to think first of all about what type of technologies you need. So you can build an app in mainly 3 different formats. So you've got your native. Native is where I mentioned that earlier. So that's developing in 2 different frameworks, one for iOS, one for Android. I should also mention there are different operating systems as well. So the likes of Huawei has now released their own operating system as well, and you can build apps which is similar to the Android framework. You can build apps and push them to the Huawei store as well in their own native platform. You can also build cross-platform apps, so that's similar to the hybrid approach that I mentioned previously. So that's build once and then push across two platforms. They are becoming increasingly more popular and more capable as well as time goes on. So you can actually do a lot with cross-platform apps. These days, if you asked me 5 years ago, they weren't quite up to scratch, but now you can basically create the same kind of experience as a native app. There are some things that might still guide you down the route of native apps, and we do both. So native or cross-platform. And ultimately, it's really the use of device functionality, for example, the use of other systems you might want to link in with, or the use of offline functionality that might help you determine what you need. Do you need a native app or cross-platform? All those things could be achieved with cross-platform as well, but you will notice it's slightly more difficult to then apply certain functions, and particularly the more recent app functions that are always getting released with new versions of smartphone devices. You also have web apps as well. So we build web apps as well, and quite often you see the progression of, an app might start out as a web app, and then it might progress on to being a mobile app. The key difference is a web app is accessible via a URL, which is a link in your web browser. A native app or cross-platform app is usually pushed to the app stores, so that's accessible to the wider public, or it might just be an internal mobile app as well that you directly install onto the device. But quite often you find with web apps as well, it's a slightly quicker way of building. It's also a quicker way of trying to test a minimum viable product as well. If you're trying to do something quite innovative, it's usually much easier to build a web app, get it working on there, and then eventually move over to a mobile platform. But again, it depends on the product. Some products just aren't built for web, and there are certain functions that are a lot more difficult to do on web as well. So really the things you might want to consider when you're creating an app are, first of all, who are your target users? So on that, we when every project starts with us, we're asking the customer, okay, you want to develop an app. How does that break down in terms of user types? To have a kind of a platform that you're monetizing, usually you wouldn't just have one user on an app. You'd have another user type at minimum, which would be what we call a super admin user. So that would be you coming in from a non-dev perspective to manage the platform. And that just helps you run the platform by yourself without any kind of development input. And you might have other players in there as well, other user types who see other types of interfaces. Also, the next key piece there is what are the most important features of an app. And what I'd say there is, a key recommendation we also make quite early on is if you've got your user types there, it's really good to then list out the kind of functionality that might be associated with those user types, even if that was a bullet point list. That's a very good place to start, and it gives any development company that you're speaking to a very good indication of what you're looking for. Quite often we get people only thinking about one user type, and then they forget that actually they do need something to be able to manage the system. Also, then you want to think about what type of platform will allow you to kind of move forwards with your concept. That might be web, it might be mobile. You might then need to go down the native route as well. And it's really important to think about that from square one. Also, there would be price implications on the basis of that decision as well. And usually your development partner can try and advise you down that route. Also, I'd say, how do you measure your ROI? That is important to think about from square one. If you're pouring usually thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of pounds into an app development project, you want to know exactly how you're going to get your money back, or how you're going to get value out of that platform. And just touching on there, I would say as well, we usually try and guide people down a minimum viable product route. And what I mean by that is that this is your kind of first phase app that, a lot of people come to us and they've got great ideas for changing the world, and that's fantastic. Usually it's much better to build that phase one product. You've got something there, you can get it up at minimal cost and minimal effort in terms of timeline. And then you can learn from your users after that. So, that's where you can, learn from your user feedback and then build on those features afterwards. So, when you're defining those features, it's really good to think about, okay, what are my must-haves? And Craig will walk through that in a bit more detail in a few slides. And other things to think about when you're building your app are, what's your revenue model? So, in terms of revenue, you can use in-app purchases. You can also use web platforms as well to process payments in some cases. It's good to think about that as well, from the perspective of what kind of costs will be involved as well. So, using in-app purchases, it's quite often that you'll face about 30% commission rates for in-app purchases. So that could be a huge commission for any business model. And also, so it's very important to think about that from square one. There are other options out there as well. So you can use kind of web-based payment processes, but just keep in mind they're not as intuitive as an in-app purchase. An in-app purchase is kind of one click to buy. Whereas if you take someone to a web platform to make a purchase, it is a lot more, type in your card details and stuff like that. So it just creates a kind of a pressure point there on clients making the purchase. And also, you might want to think about, okay, is it a free app? It doesn't have to be a paid app. Not all apps are paid. So you have free apps, you might be trying to achieve something, in a different way and get established return on investment via different means. It's also worth keeping in mind that 90% of apps on the Apple Store are free to download, but 96% on the Google Play are free to download. So it means that those apps, instead of being priced to download, they're free to download, and they might make money in a different way. They might be designed not to make money as well, which is always an option. So if you are, going down the free route, then there are the different ways of making purchases that that can tie in with people buying things through the app. So first of all, you could have consumables, for example. That's where, for example, we've done gamified platforms with currency that you can buy, a points-based system, and that allows you to kind of buy those points and then spend them within the platform. You've also got non-consumables, so that's things like filters or stickers or even documents and files for training companies, which can be used to purchase. And then you've got subscriptions as well, so you don't necessarily have to kind of charge a fee upfront to download the app. In that case, you could have a subscription model, and that could be, for example, a personal trainer with a monthly fee associated with those services, or subscriptions for either a yearly or offer a discount on a yearly or yearly versus monthly purchase. So yeah, there's lots of different ways you can monetize apps, and it's good to think about that from square one as well. And also in terms of monetization, it's really good to consider ads in that situation. So there are a few different types of ads that you can create with a mobile platform. You've got banner ads. Usually that we use a kind of third-party tool which services doing banner ads. The one thing that I'd say about banner ads is that it was really popular a few years ago, and you'll still see a lot of free apps that have banner ads. Sometimes you don't have a lot of control over what type of advertisement is going into that app. So it's just something to be aware of. You've also got native ads. So that's where we would actually build an advert into the app itself. That's a lot more intuitive. It's also a lot more geared up towards the kind of ads in the platform itself. So examples of that are kind of Facebook, Instagram. As you're scrolling down, you do see adverts there. That's a native ad which is designed for that platform itself. And usually if you do that, it's a lot more tailored as well towards what the users want to see. So I mentioned the Community Club Apps platform. They do have native advertising in that platform, and they do that. It's essentially football advertisers that they're promoting through the platform, and that's also a way of monetizing. You've also got full screen ads. They're also used on a few gaming platforms and stuff. For me, it's a bit hit or miss with full screen ads. Sometimes they've got, you have to watch them for 20 seconds before you kind of move on to the next screen. So it creates a lot of frustration for users. Usually it's designed as a way of making sure they sign up for the subscription or purchase the app. But you also get some platforms as well which do it in a clever way. That's platforms like TikTok, for example. When you're scrolling through the videos, you do get taken to a full screen advert there. So some platforms do it quite intuitively. So yeah, that's it from the first section of the presentation. I'm now going to pass you to Craig, who's going to talk about some of the key highlights to think about on any app development journey. So over to you, Craig.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks very much, James. And I'll just very briefly introduce myself, just so in case anyone wasn't sure. So I'm a product manager at Zoodoo. I've been a product manager now for nearly a year and a half, I think, James is correct. So and that's really around managing in-house software as a service products, but in particular client products, and that's really bringing their product visions to market. That's sort of beginning to end is really the process there. And one of the great insights from my side has been able to see so many client calls or first time client calls, because you get to see a wide range of different ideas, different visions come to the forefront at the beginning of what we're about to see, which is the development process. So hopefully this will give you some insight into what to expect, particularly if you're looking to establish an MVP, as James mentioned before, sort of minimal viable product in the beginning. Obviously, as well, it's worth considering that, as you can see from the evolution of software, that there's been a lot of new technologies, and as well as that, there's been a lot of influence on the project management and sort of flow of development as well. So I wanted to give you a good update on that, just before you pull the trigger on any sort of project that might be on your mind as well. So if we just jump to the development process here, we'll open up each one. So hopefully you can start to see a sort of beginning and end to the entire development process that we've defined here. And this is a lot more representative of a waterfall methodology. So just in case you might trip up as well, because there's two sort of distinct ways software is tackled in 2021 for sure, with agile being the sort of new kid on the block, and waterfall is more described as the sort of old way of doing things. However, what I would say is agile also has had a strong influence on the waterfall methodology, and it still exists, as we can see here today, and works really well for a more fixed cost and timeline project, so that you can really establish your version 1.0 of your app or your web app, whatever your vision may be at the current moment. And you may see as well, if you have a close look at the sort of timelines, just firstly on each point, 1 to 4, there's a lot of time spent on the development, as you can see at point 3, that's 3 to 6 months sort of on average, and maybe less time, focused on the initial areas as well as point 4. But as you can see for point 2, we flagged that as the most important part, and that's really just to establish, at the very beginning of a project, you have the most flexibility. You've not written down any code yet, you've not implemented any servers, you've not switched those on, so you really have a lot of control over what you want your product to be at these. And this, of course, the first 2 areas I would say have the strongest influence on what your product ultimately is going to become. And a big component of these first 2 areas is what I would say is generating assets for yourself, so you can convey just a little bit more of what your product is without actually having it exist in a marketplace or on the web. So right now, for example, you may have a vision. You could have a more business focused mission statement and a pitch. So a lot of what we try to do here is put that on the track of software development, because a lot of that is useful in establishing things like user journeys, requirements, functional requirements, non-functional requirements, and then eventually that leading on to things like wireframes and designs, all of which are essential components before any sort of development takes place. But so yeah, and just to really give you a quick overview, so research and ideas, when you're really just coming to the, you could be speaking to a digital agency, you could be speaking to us at that point without issue. But the goal for everyone at that point is to establish things like user journeys and functional requirements, so to be prepared for developing the full flow of systems. If you can imagine a single app, if you were to take Amazon or maybe Etsy, just try to think of all the screens that actually exist. You know, when you're navigating an app, for example, you're just looking at the one thing all the time. You know, you're never looking at the full picture. Really what you want to establish is that full picture at stage 2. And that's why we flag it as being such an important part, because that ties into so much, including things James has mentioned before, such as the user types, as well as things like the user flow and the user experience. And that's really where we center a lot of our thinking when it comes to establishing what your users are doing as they're interacting with the app, and how are they interacting with the app or the system, essentially. So we'll move on to the next slide, I think. Thanks, James. So yeah, so if we're looking here at the defining user journeys and requirements, so this stage is the most important part of the whole development process. We've covered that because it will help outline every aspect of how a user may interact with the app. So it's crucial to get this right to make your app a success. And what I've listed here are really the assets that you can start to generate now and generate with us or with digital agencies. And these will help you establish what your user journey and what your requirements are, because it's important to remember the word requirement there, that could actually mean, you know, a full functional requirements document, you know, 80 pages listing out every button, every action that can occur, as well as maybe non-functional requirements, you know, what the system has to be able to do out with the actual user interaction. And you could even develop things like product requirements, as well as, and you'll have your maybe business requirements as well. So there's a lot to really establish there. So these things are really a bit more preemptive and helps you establish that final document quicker. You know, and that because that document will ultimately lead on to your more traditional wireframes and designs. So this is really a really good starting point. If you have a vision, you've got, you know, you've got a business plan essentially, but you're not quite sure how the actual software is to link up with that. These things will help you establish that really quickly, as well as help you establish them by trying to develop an MVP. So effectively with as reduced a cost as possible, without having to go, so you're not, it's already, the flow of an app is already a large scale project. So if you were trying to do everything all at once, it's very easy to get lost as well. So hopefully this will keep you on track on that side. So we'll dive a little bit more into those key assets here. So user personas, yes. So we can gain insight into specific user types, a key word there, by developing user personas. While personas are based on the experience of real people, please keep in mind that your user personas shouldn't be specific individuals, but rather a fictional portrayal of a segment or demographic within your target audience. Okay, so you can see there's a strong link there between user types and user personas, but they are different. User personas, you're very much going into establishing that fictional character. So in this case, we have Drew, a sales associate. And what you're really trying to establish here, okay, is who or what is the type of person or who might be the person interacting with the system that I want to create. You know, that's a really good question and helps you establish. And you know, you're trying to develop more than one here. So maybe 3 or 4 different types of people. Thinking about demographics, you're really trying to capture what is your target audience, and you're trying to condense that down into singular entities here, so singular people, if you like, and that goes a long way if you haven't already established who your user types might be, because user types are a really great starting point for understanding what you need to develop and what is essential. Because as James also mentioned before, you know, you may be thinking a lot about your target audience, almost the more general users coming onto your system. But what about, for example, your interaction with an app? You know, that you might want to be that super admin. You might want to have access to data that is being given by general users, and you may want that to be in a form that's analytical, there's maybe you want data visualization there, and you certainly probably want control over your users that are on the system. So if someone was acting inappropriately on the system, or was doing things that you didn't quite want them to be doing, maybe you'd want that ability to easily remove people from the system, for example. So that's a really important thing that you want to establish, because that's something where you need to have a URL link, perhaps a web app link, something to click on and delete on. That's something that has to be built if we're going for this sort of bespoke solution. And these things as well is worth considering, because any user type can go into, you can have a full range, a full feature list that goes on forever. But part of what we're doing here by establishing the user types is saying, okay, who are the essential people that need to be distinct? So they're not the same. They're not all mashed up into the one. A general user can't really be a super admin. So you're really identifying from their perspectives how they're interacting with the system, and that'll help you establish things, again, mentioned before, like user journeys, experience, what they're looking for from the app while they're using it. So yeah, we'll move on to the next point. So here's another thing, user actions and use cases. A user action and use case represents how a user may interact with your app in order to complete a task, and should always be based on research and data, as this removes our own perceptions and bias and ensure the app is inclusive for users with a range of cognitive and physical abilities. So those user types that we've just established here with aid of the personas, you're really starting to define what it is they're doing. Are they signing into the app? How might they sign in? Do they need to sign up first? That's usually can be the sort of first actions that occur on most systems that have login access. Maybe though they're a general user that you don't want them to have to go through a login process. And actually, this is a system that's open to all up to a certain point. If you go onto Pinterest and you can browse a certain amount of the system as a non-user almost, but then the trigger occurs where you want that person to be incorporated into the system with a login access, etc. So that's an important consideration there as well. Maybe how much of the app is accessible to who, and that's where the definition of user types is super useful at that point as well. But really just getting as well to this, you're really jotting down what is the actions that the user is doing, and what is the sort of end goal as well of those actions. So how this is a list of ways a user may interact with the system or maybe a really good starting point is to consider, for example, Domino's delivery. So I want a pizza, I'm hungry. So what are the steps that I have to perform and interact with the system in order to get to that? Okay, this pizza will be delivered at this particular time. There's a start and an end point there, and it's good to have those defined and listed out, because it establishes not just for yourself, but for the developers who are going to be building your system, because it's very rare for just a single person to be building an entire system, so that they clearly understand what is ultimately your vision of how your users are interacting. So yeah. And yeah, this is a good point. I did mention the sort of agile manifesto, agile methodology influence that's been having on the software development world. It's, I would say, a good idea as well to have a product roadmap. And again, this conversation could occur with digital agencies. This isn't something you'd have to do completely on your own, but it's a good discussion point, because it can establish, okay, if you remember the timelines on the previous slide, 2 to 3 months, you're establishing how much time is going to be spent on these areas. What can we predict? But also you're kind of factoring as well some crossover there. So it would be rare to say all development ceases and then now we're just focusing on testing, or all designs are now sealed and done, absolutely, and now we're moving on to development. Sometimes there can be a little bit of crossover there in the mix, so as far as designs are just finishing up and development's beginning, or maybe even there's situations where you could start development on a particular user type just to establish, for example, you're a little bit concerned about a payment processor working properly and research occurring there with that API. So if payments were an essential component of your system, you might want to establish things of how you might approach that and have fallback plans as well. And this really just makes that clear about where attention is going to be, where the concentration of effort is going to be on a fixed cost and timeline, and it really just defines that nice and clearly, so everyone can take a glance and know where we're at. Essentially, that's the benefit of such a thing. And then really just moving on to the MOSCO requirements. So MOSCO stands for must have, should have, could have, and won't have. It's a popular method of prioritizing app features for early iterations, as it focuses on how crucial each feature is. One thing I'd want to say as well, just to avoid confusion with the keyword requirements there, I think it would be totally fine as well to establish almost high level requirements, or maybe even more like user stories is worth looking at there, because that's enough to really establish what a feature is without having to go too far into the functional requirements document at this stage. So you still can apply MOSCO to a more high level list of requirements, and that's something that we've advised as well. And as another example of maybe that more agile having an influence on waterfall, so that you're because a big factor for getting software from zero to a market is that time to market. You know, we've established that with clients. That's one of the main questions, as well as, of course, how long is this going to take to get to be live, to be accessible to the users I want to get in touch with, that I want to market to. You know, so this is a really good way to, once you've established your personas, your user types, to then say, okay, what is my feature list for those user types? High level features. I want my user to be able to log in. I want the general user to be able to sign up. I want the general user to be able to add a friend. You know, it could be that much detail at this point. And then what you're trying to do is, you've got this full list of features. You're trying to allocate them into these specific columns, because what you're doing is you're establishing what are the most essential components of my system. And this really helps establish what are the bare essentials for going to market. And a big reason we recommend doing this is it establishes what should be worked on almost first as well, which is, you know, what are the most important parts, but also it trims off anything that may not be as essential as you may have originally thought. You don't maybe need your app to be all singing and dancing, this can do everything. Maybe it, preferably as its version 1.0, it should do the must-haves really well. That's the better attitude to have, we would say, as far as establishing yourself in the market anyway, and also contributes to that lower cost of development. So obviously, if there's a reduced feature list because we've allocated the ones as must-haves and maybe some should-haves, that gives far more focus on elements for development in the development process, and to get those done right, you know, rather than worrying about something that may not, you know what, users probably would only interact with these could haves 5% of the time, now that we've had that conversation and we've established that. So maybe that's why it should go into that column. So those are the sort of conversations that should occur at this point. And yeah, you can keep the requirements high level. That's a good point to kind of finish on with a slide. So yeah.
Thanks. That was
yeah. I think I'll hand back over to James, but I'll still be around for any questions around these key slides, of course, at the tail end of the webinar as well. But I'll hand back over to you, James.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, just to wrap up, we'll have a few minutes for questions at the end. So happy to answer anyone's question, either on the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself as well, feel free. Just to touch on, you know, first of all, some of the ways apps can benefit your business. So, you know, first of all, and quite importantly, in a lot of cases, it's revenue. So it can be used as an additional source of revenue to businesses if you monetize the app. It also can help build customer loyalty. So, you know, apps are functionality in your pocket, and they go a lot further than websites to build loyalty through the likes of push notifications, regular updates. Push notifications are only really achievable through, or mobile push notifications are only achievable through developing a mobile app. You also can use it to build better customer services through chatbots and instant support. So chatbots have been quite a big evolution in recent years. And you can also provide secure ways of making payments, whether that be through payment processors or in-app purchases, and also include stuff like instant messaging as well. And also apps do offer a variety of different ways to interact with content. So you've got various different integrations, widgets as well that you can use. So there's lots of different ways to create really engaging apps. And also, just to touch on some of the Zoodoos and Zoodon'ts of app development, we've always say, make sure that you're prepared to fully test on your side. So, make sure that from the outset that when you're defining your requirements, that's what you want. And then throughout the app development phase, keep an eye on things, and feedback as well. Our worst nightmare is getting to the end of a project and a client not having looked at anything and decide that that's not really what they want. And that's why we keep people engaged throughout the project to make sure that, what that is at the end is exactly what they want. So, make sure that you make the most of OS features as well. So, on that, there's always new features coming out with smartphones, and new capabilities like AR, VR, stuff like that. So that's really what creates new innovative platforms as well. And also, some Zoodon'ts as well. I'd always say, make sure that you pay close attention to that design phase that Craig walked you through. That is, one of the most crucial phases from our perspective, is because if someone's giving us high level requirements, we need to then figure out, okay, how does that work from a systematic perspective? And that's such a crucial point, because then you start to map out what the database looks like and how the users interact. Also, a big one there is don't underestimate the importance of marketing. A lot of customers might expect that, okay, you develop a great app, it's going to be instantly popular. And that just doesn't work that way. You need to put budget behind marketing the platform. You need to have a way of engaging users from square one and onboarding them as well. Building a great app is one thing, and it's a completely other thing to get users on board. And also, don't try and force your users into new routines. We'd always say there, a mobile app is designed to fulfill, things very, very efficiently. So if you're creating something completely innovative there, or you're creating a completely different logic to what people are used to, you're probably defeating the purpose of what it means to build an app in the first place. So it's just something important to think about there. And just before we wrap up, the last slide here is just highlighting some key growth areas that we see for 2021. Augmented reality is huge. You've now seen the likes of AR used quite heavily in e-commerce platforms as well. So the likes of L'Oreal use it for their makeup app. You've got Specsavers using it for sunglasses to see what they look like before you buy them. Furniture as well. Companies like Wayfair, you can place the furniture in your room to see what it looks like in real sizes. So AR, although it's been about for a few years, it's only just started hitting that innovation curve or adoption curve, and the things that are achievable with it are amazing. Artificial intelligence as well. It goes without saying that this is one of the biggest modern technological evolutions of our day, which is providing so much more capability in the back end platforms to kind of feed through data. You've got apps like Amazon that help you when you scan a photo of an item. It'll help you find similar items in the store on the app, or other apps that we build as well that have AI working in the back end, so feeding through data, analyzing that data, and working through various different algorithms. So yeah, AI is a big thing for 2021, and also 5G. It goes without saying, devices are becoming more and more connected as we evolve, and that means that with the 5G really means that things like IoT, Internet of Things, can connect so many different devices in terms of them feeding data to each other. You can also achieve a lot more with apps as well, because people are connected in more efficient ways than ever before. So yeah, 5G is a big thing for app development. Brilliant. So yeah, that concludes us. That's the final slide there. What I'd encourage anyone to get in touch with us at any point. There's some contact details there. Go on our website, have a look.